Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to be talking Colorado. We've got an April 2nd deadline here, and I've got the guys from the draw. I've got Jordan Christensen and Jason Browning on the line. Guys, how you doing?
Good, Jay. Thanks for having us. Real good.
Yeah, I look forward to chatting about Colorado. We've got kind of a short window here. This episode is going to actually air later this afternoon, but we've got about a week's period before the Colorado deadline for big game hunting. I believe it's April 2nd, and Colorado has definitely done some changes this year to their fee structure, and a few changes across the board. I'll kind of give you guys the floor to kind of open up and tell us about some of these new changes in the state of Colorado. Before we do that, I want to let the listeners know a little bit about you guys. If they haven't listened to the podcast episodes that I've done with you prior to this Colorado application podcast, we've done some great podcasts on Arizona, New Mexico, and I believe Utah. And I've gotten great feedback from listeners. You guys are really taking time with clients and customers. You guys have an application service. I'm sure you'll go into it and tell us about that. For any of you new listeners, I encourage you to go back and listen to those other episodes and hear how thorough these guys were. And you'll get a sense of that here when we go through the Colorado, all the big game species. But guys, I'm going to give you the floor in regards to anything pertinent here with the fee changes, and kind of talk a little bit about, how the draw works. I believe they just do the first choice first. They do a first choice draw, and then they go into your other choices. And Colorado is definitely a unique state in that it's a preference point state. Not to be confused, Colorado is definitely sometimes a confusing state in my mind. But these guys are going to help shed some light on it. Guys, take the floor here.
Sure, definitely. So, the first thing is we've got two different kind of point systems going on in Colorado. You have a pure preference point for the deer, elk, and antelope, which means whoever has the most points draws. It also means, Jay, that there are few situations where a guy should be surprised that he drew a permit in Colorado. I think that a lot of guys, they are kind of just blindly applying every year, hoping something happens, and it's hard to be successful in a preference point situation like that. You should be planning ahead, doing some research, using Go Hunt, using the filtering 2.0 feature to identify the hunt that you're meaning to go on. And then essentially at the end there, you're just simply jumping through a hoop to draw your permit. Now, any given year, I guess you could have odds if you're in the max point pool and there's a few of you in that versus the number of tags. But more often than not, we shouldn't ever be surprised by drawing a tag in Colorado for those three species. And that's a really cool, it fits very well in a big hunt plan and a big application strategy, because we can navigate around that a lot better than we can in different states like New Mexico or Arizona, Nevada, Utah, where we don't very often know whether we're going to be successful or not. We can plan hunts in Colorado and kind of execute that plan because it's a preference point state. So then we move into the deer, the sheep, moose, and goat, and we move into the weighted point system, and that one gets probably one of the more complicated drawing processes of any of the states out there, but it also might be the one that's the best. And with the new system and the new fee structures that I'm going to go into here in just a second, moving forward, especially for younger hunters looking to get started somewhere, it's going to be a bit of an investment, but it also in 20 years when the smoke clears, this could really show itself as being the most viable option outside of an equal odds kind of drawing process. So changes this year, kind of 2018 for Colorado was kind of a throwaway year for all of the application stuff. Now, if you were lucky enough to jump in and get involved in that, you might have grabbed a couple of points for not a whole lot of money. But moving forward, for the sake of everyone that's been at it for a while, and just how, kind of getting us to a nice place where things can be consistent again, I think that these changes were a positive for the state of Colorado and for guys that are looking to get started or have been applying for a long time. So what it is, the $10 habitat stamp that's been there for a long time still exists, but now they've added a qualifying license in Colorado, which can be a number of things. Two of them particularly that stuck out to me, Jay, was that they dropped the price on a black bear permit in Colorado down to $101. So that's pretty exciting. And if you know that you're going to be going to Colorado, like I say, if you're planning this correctly, you would know that you're going to draw. Like, that would be a great year to use that bear permit as your qualifying license instead of simply buying the non-resident annual small game license for $81.75, because if you're going to be in the field for, at that point, an extra $15, $20, you did it. You've got your a bear permit, you got your qualifier, and you're headed out into the field if you successfully draw. So now we've got, let's just even kind of level set. Most guys are going to probably lock in to the $81.75 small game annual permit. That's your qualifier, so we're at $91.75. This is very similar to Arizona, Utah, Nevada. We've seen a lot of states. New Mexico started one this year, Idaho. It's just the way it's been going lately to get started. So we have that license, and now, different than in years past, we have $9 application fee. And that's $9 across the board. That's for deer, elk, antelope, sheep, moose, goat, desert bighorn as well. And that's all there is. That's the only fee there is to get started with these applications. Now, if you want to buy preference points for the sheep, the moose, the goat, the Rocky Mountain bighorn, the moose, and the goat, then you need to expect, after you've processed your application and once they've done the draw, then you need to expect an additional $100 on each of those applications for the Rocky, the moose, and the mountain goat. Now, you're going to have an option to opt in or opt out of that. So if you're already past your 3-point, loyalty program there for the sheep, moose, and goat, and you know that you are eligible to now draw, depending on what your budget is and depending on what your goals are, you could continue down that path for nothing more than $9 and know that every year your name is still going to be in that hat and you have a chance at drawing. But if you're less than 3 points, then you have to be spending that extra $100 on those 3 species, or you'll never get to a point where you even have a chance at drawing those, and you would simply just be donating money to Colorado for no reason at that point. So a lot of changes in the fee structures, a lot of changes, not a lot of changes, I guess, on how the draw is processed. It's just how you get in the game. And something that we've been talking a lot about here with guys that are calling in about Colorado, that maybe the $109 isn't so appealing for the Rocky for them, is for $9, there is no $100 fee when you were looking at the desert bighorn. And to get a little more value out of that hunting license, I mean, that becomes a $9 raffle ticket. The odds were atrocious last year. I think they were 1 in 1,697. I think with this hunting license that's been in place now, we're going to see those odds get back to a more reasonable number, a much more reasonable number. But at least we're in another sheep hat or bucket, so to speak, for $9 if we decide the 109 isn't what we're looking for. So that's kind of
something else to be noted there, guys, is they're no longer accepting paper applications. If I'm correct, it's all online. Am I right in that?
Yes, that's correct. No more paper applications. And this is year 2 where there is no float. There's no upfront money required during this application process, so there's no refund checks. It's a lot more streamlined process. It's a lot more similar to many of the other states now, and we don't have to be chasing money or watching for it coming in and out any longer in Colorado.
Okay, good stuff. Why don't we, feel free if you feel like you left anything out there to add it, but why don't we dive into the deer and elk portion of the draw, talk a little bit about how that works, and then let's, just go through the deer, go through the elk.
Okay, perfect. The one last thing on licensing I would say, Jay, is with our Kids Apply Free program, we're definitely having a lot of folks taking advantage of that. And now with there is no qualifying license except the $1.75 fee. I believe that's a search and rescue fee there in Colorado, and then $9 a species. So, short-term goals, long-term goals for the youth hunters, this is a super affordable state to get started with. The other nice thing about Colorado, comparing it to other states, is that they don't purge your points for 10 years in Colorado. So say you get your youth hunter started, and at 18 years old, when this all of a sudden gets to be a little bit more expensive, they would have till they're 28 to pick up where you left off, and they have this great foundation of points that you've built for them without a whole lot of money being spent any given year. So that'd be the one last thing on the licensing stuff. As far as the deer and elk, I think, at 10,000 feet, the preference point system is probably the easiest draw system to break. And there's no question, at least in my mind, that when you look at Colorado, for deer, elk, and antelope, that system is broken. Someone who is getting started with 0 points today mathematically will never get a chance to hunt what is considered the elite units in the state. The fourth season deer, the first season elk in the northwest corner of the state, and there's even some of them that may not be creeping or have the point totals just yet, but they're so far behind the curve, even catching up to some of them that seem like they're a little bit more obtainable, like a fourth season in Unit 40 or some of the stuff in 76 is probably still unlikely to happen. And so really where we're at, and one of the concepts we drive home here is that, Colorado shouldn't be looked at as a long-term goal state for deer, elk, or antelope. It should be looked at as an opportunity to go hunting. And there's a lot of great stuff, especially focusing on the deer going on in Colorado. If you throw a dart at Colorado right now, the chances of hitting a county that a 200-inch deer came out of are extremely high in the last couple of years, if not every year. So it's like, if we can just be in the field in these units that have that kind of age class, have those kind of buck to doe ratios, we're giving ourselves an opportunity to be successful. Now, the other thing that we can do in Colorado, because the only time your points get purged is when you draw your first choice, is we look for different opportunities to go hunting where maybe we can even draw a second and occasionally a third season hunt as a second choice because it's going undersubscribed, and we retain our points. And we can do that for a number of different reasons, but one of my favorite is because if I finally draw a fourth season tag that maybe took 5 or 6 years to draw, or maybe it even took 8 or 9 years to draw, the likelihood of me being able to take the most advantage of that permit and really do it the justice that it deserves is so much higher if I've spent other years and more time on the ground. If I wait 15 years to go on a fourth season hunt and it's the first time I've ever been on the unit, the likelihood of me, doing as good as I possibly could is a lot lower versus if I've hunted it a few times leading up to that fourth season hunt or a third season hunt or whatever the case may be, and now I'm there in better dates, better rut activity, and I really gave myself a chance to be successful with one of those elite hunts, and I went hunting as often as I wanted to leading up to that. So,
Jordan, explain that real fast. You went over it pretty fast, and people that maybe aren't familiar with Colorado, the way the system works is everybody puts in their first choice, but you can apply for a second choice, and it doesn't affect your points dive into that a little deeper, explaining to some of the fixed gold mugs out there, including myself, that it takes about 8 times to say that, so it really sinks in that you don't lose your points, but you get to hunt, and you can get some second and third season hunts potentially as a second choice, and it doesn't affect your points at all.
That's correct, Jay. So yeah, the only choice that Colorado is looking at on the first round of applicants is that first choice, and you can actually even apply point only for that as your selection, or you could put in for some hunt that it's never, that's extremely unlikely that you're going to draw as your first choice. And the whole goal of that isn't to draw that, it's to continue building points, but still going to Colorado, we would put a hunt that we find using the filtering 2.0 or using the draw odds on Go Hunt as a second choice there. Now, it's hard to say how many other people are going to be doing that as well, and those odds aren't typically published anywhere on what your odds of drawing that second choice were, but more often than not, they're extremely high. You're dealing with a lesser amount of permits because it's whatever's left after the draw is concluded, but often we can snag a second choice in a hunt that's further away from the rut, typically second or third season. If we're looking at the plains, every once in a while we can find a plains deer that's more of that late October, or maybe a whitetail only that is a similar kind of concept, and we can go hunting without losing our points by putting it as a second choice. And for me, if I'm going to burn a number of points, if there's any kind of option to do that even the year before we start, before we're going to burn the points that we've been saving for a long time, you're just going to be that much better off the year that you choose to use your points for that premier hunt. So it's a really awesome program if we take full advantage of all the different twists and turns that they offer us.
So Jay, you kind of, to simplify it a little bit, we kind of set up what's your overall goal for your deer in Colorado, and that's your long-term goal and what you want to do with that. And we don't stop there. Then we put in plans for the years between when you start applying and when we're actually going to go on that hunt, because we have the data to tell us how long it's going to take you to get that hunt roughly. And we go ahead and plan in our hunt plan for all the years in between that. And that's what Jordan's talking about, using that second choice to get you into Colorado hunting, not just have one overall long-term goal in Colorado.
Right, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but it also allows you to potentially hunt that same unit that you're chasing for third or fourth season, potentially hunt it every year up until the time, if not every year, maybe every other year, draw it as a second choice, but get to know the unit inside and out so that when you do draw that third or fourth season tag, you know exactly where to go, all of the different private land situations and access points, and you basically get to know that unit, or you can bounce around and hunt all over the state of Colorado in different second season and other choices, potentially maybe archery, other options where you just get to go deer hunting, but you're still, basically waiting for that time when you cash in on your, third or fourth season tag. And I also might add, there are some hunts out there by using the Go Hunt Insider. You can actually get some third season tags, believe it or not, in this second choice draw, and it doesn't affect your points. So here you are sitting on a third season tag, and you never know when you get a big cold front, big snowstorm, all of a sudden the deer potentially, rutting on that third season, and you have a chance at, some pretty good bucks. Colorado, like you said, every county is pretty much known for having a 200-inch deer at one point or another killed out of it. And a lot of people just put in and they don't understand that they complain that there's no opportunity, and the reality is that they can, as a second choice, pretty much go hunting in Colorado every year, and if not every year, every other, every couple of years, correct?
That's correct. And it's like you said, there's two basic ways you could do it. you're going to have your long-term goal, and you're going to set that, and that's what we're going to strive for. But then, like you suggested, you could do two things. You could stick with that unit, and you can try and figure out what it's going to take to draw a second or third season, how often you can get yourself back in that unit. I like to consult to that because I think it's real important if you're going to go hunt a unit and you're going to invest all these years in going on that fourth season hunt, to walk into that unit for the first time 48 hours before that hunt just seems crazy to me. If I could be there 3 or 4 years between, I mean, now things are going to change, right? That fourth season, the deer might not be where they are when they're there the second, third season. Migration happens. We all know that. But by being in the unit, I mean, you're going to make acquaintances. You're going to see the landscape. All those things will happen as you hunt those second and third season tags, and all that prepares you for when you finally get there on that fourth season tag you've dreamed about. So that's one scenario. Kick to another scenario, you have this long-term goal, and maybe you're going with an outfitter, or you've got a buddy that lives in Colorado, and you're not so worried about being in that unit up to that point. So go somewhere else. Go on an archery hunt. Go on a third season over here, and like you suggested, get lucky with some snow and get to kill a big old buck on a third season. So you can have that strategy too, where you're still going hunting in Colorado every year, every other year, whatever you want to do, but you're still keeping that first choice and working toward that long-term goal. And that's what, our planning and our hunt plan, that's what we do, is we go through all these scenarios and we put in place long-term goals backed up with short-term goals in Colorado to get you in the field hunting. Colorado is a great state to go hunting in.
Yeah, and I think it's important to add that Colorado for deer, unless I'm mistaken, is a draw state. In other words, to get tags in Colorado, you have to draw it, whereas there are opportunities for elk that are over the counter. And that's a whole nother discussion that I'm sure we're going to have, but potentially you could have the opportunity to go over the counter archery elk hunting. You just buy a license and you don't put in for these you still put in for these draw units, but you buy an OTC elk tag and you're off and running, every single year. And I think one of the things Colorado has kind of, cut their teeth, or, their wildlife management whole system has, in my opinion, been based on the unbelievable numbers of elk that inhabit Colorado. One of the things from my perspective that Colorado has to kind of watch, and I think it's been happening, is the OTC elk tags in Colorado have the quality. There's so many people out there chasing bulls and harvesting bulls and what have you, that the quality of hunt, in my opinion, from what I'm hearing, has gone down. And I know the game management, I know the game, the game and fish, or fish and game, whatever they call it there, they have to manage those elk numbers, and they say in units that they're above or below harvest objective, but they got to watch that they don't kill the golden goose, so to speak. And I think they're at that point now. Curious you guys' thoughts on that over-the-counter elk, and what we may see in the future on that.
Sure. No, it's interesting that you bring that up, Jay, because fact is I kind of got a text message last night from a gentleman that was keeping me he keeps me in the loop a little bit about what's going on in Colorado. And so in this spring, so the season structure is set every 5 years in Colorado, and this spring is when they're starting to talk a lot about what changes, if any, are going to be happening in Colorado, and it covers a lot of different ground. But one of them that really is getting a lot of traction right now, it's not set in stone yet, but it's been addressed in a couple of the regional meetings, and it's now moving forward, and it looks like it's picking up steam, is that they're going to do away with all of the over-the-counter archery hunting in Colorado for elk. So everything is going to be happening on a draw system with quotas, just like all the rest of the hunts offered in Colorado, and the reason behind that they're giving us right now is that the distribution of hunters is not happening like they need it to. There are areas and regions of the state that are literally hundreds of permits, if not 1,000+ permits, undersubscribed each year. Meanwhile, you have other areas of the state that are just getting thousands upon thousands of hunters flooding into those areas. The hunting experience is poor, the success rates are poor, and they're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to make that better moving forward. So, we don't really have an opinion one way or the other, Jay, on what I think it would be a mistake for us where we haven't spent tons of time in that state during those parts of the year. But if people do have opinions on that, they are taking public comment right now. You can look it up on Colorado Parks and Wildlife, look up the 5-year season structure, and then there's a place for public comment. The one thing I would tell your listeners and anyone that does participate in those over-the-counter archery permits, as a safety net, if you know you're going to Colorado this year, you're going to be buying a hunting license of some sort anyways. To not take advantage of the time you have right now to get a point, if that is in fact what they go do, is probably a mistake. It's cheaper than it's ever been. It's $9. Get yourself ahead of the curve that's about to happen if this does take place. And I think that Colorado could see a huge change. I think that there's going to be some other states that are going to be affected by this change if it does in fact get passed. But it's not happened yet, but there is a little momentum happening right now in Colorado that over-the-counter archery elk hunt could go to a draw starting in 2020. And like I say, I don't know whether that's going to be good or bad, but there is a big effort to redistribute hunters across the whole state of Colorado and not have them so bottlenecked into certain areas of the state.
That's very interesting. This is the first I've heard of that, so that's very, very interesting. I do encourage, like you said, the listeners to go to the Colorado Division of Wildlife website and voice your opinion, put your comments in there, and it'll be interesting to see how things shake out. Guys, let's go back to the deer right now, and let's talk about some of the units and choices that, in you guys' opinion, would be good for people with low point numbers, and just talk all about the different areas, the different choices, and what have you.
Sure, definitely. So, with Colorado mule deer, like you say, it's you throw a dart at this state and you're going to hit something spectacular, right? Somewhere in the last 2 or 3 years, somebody killed an absolute giant deer, and that's really a testament to probably the management strategy. I'm a big fan of buck to doe ratios, and I just think when a state is managing aggressively for a higher buck to doe ratio, the odds of running into an older deer just get better and better. And I think, Colorado is definitely probably has the strictest regulations around that, with most of their units looking for a 40 bucks per 100 does. The next nearest to that is Nevada with a 30 bucks per 100 does. So comparing apples to apples, if you've never hunted deer in Colorado, more often than not, you're going to have a very positive experience compared to most anywhere else you may have ever hunted, simply because they're managing for that. You're supposed to see more bucks per does, and so if you see a group of 10 deer, in their mind, what their goal is 4 of those are going to be bucks, and that's pretty exciting. So no matter where we're looking to try and go hunt, the idea is you're probably going to have a more positive experience than you were outside of looking, outside of Colorado anyways. So once we start kind of breaking it down, staying a little bit on task with what me and Jason were talking about earlier with the point stuff, I have a few just real kind of go-to areas, and I'm not going to try and give up anybody's honey hole. I'm just going to kind of talk about some areas of the state, if that's all right, Jay. But like
Sure.
Eagle, Colorado, right? So Eagle, Colorado is kind of famous, right? There's always been big deer coming out of Eagle, Colorado. And when we look at that part of the world, there are there's a couple of different options to look at that actually are more of a region of units that we can look at for the second and third rifle season, and when as well as the archery or the muzzleloader. These second and third seasons in some of these areas real close to Eagle and Avon and Glenwood Springs are historically drawing with 0 points on the second and most years on the third rifle season. And so with that in mind, if we look at a little bit closer, it does take, a considerable amount of points depending on any given year, probably 9 to 14 points depending on which unit that we're looking at to accomplish a fourth season hunt in there. But I mean, talk about a home run. If we can get there, get a little barometric pressure, get a little snow on the ground, those third season hunts are fantastic. Same being said for the second season. If we can get kind of an Indian summer and maybe things stay just a little bit fair weather a little bit later into the year, then there isn't as much a reason for those deer to be down in that thick timber. There isn't as much a reason for them to be pulling off of those big bald faces that we're going to find in those upper elevations. And we put a little glass on, a little time behind the glass, and we're going to have a lot better chance at finding those big deer. And just being there with a tag in our hand gives us a chance. They're going to kill some 180 to 200 inch deer out of all of these units. They do every year. And so I like in that part of the state. I also like looking down in towards the southwest corner, some of the stuff around Durango, above Cortez, Dove Creek, Telluride. Part of what's happening here, Jay, in my opinion, is that there's a lot of hunters still hunting all of these areas. But Colorado just lends itself to big deer and older deer because it's brutal. There is some seriously physical areas all across a lot of these regions on the eastern or western fronts of the Rockies. And it just, all you need is the right deer that just has kind of slipped between the cracks in how remote some of this area is to mess up one time, one day when you're out there during those times of year, and all of a sudden you're walking up to a buck of a lifetime. The stuff around Crescent Butte and I don't even know how to say that, Panonia. It's right on the main highway there.
Yep.
Yeah, 52, 521, 53. All of these kind of regions of the state, I mean, with less than 5 points, you're going hunting in a lot of them, second and third season, and some of them, even with 0 points, you can get there and hunt without any points and on a second season there. So in my mind, I'm a lot more inclined to be looking at these areas that don't take as many points to draw a fourth season, and maybe I can draw in a second season as a viable option to go hunt as often as I want to, because where I'm going to start the second year that I get to a unit is always a different place than where I started year one, because once I've been on the ground, I get a chance to look at it. I'm always going to be shifting gears. I think another plan of attack that a lot of people that are trying to figure out, okay, so I've got this unit, I know where I'm going to go, but what do I do from there, Jay? When I'm looking at some of this stuff that's super rugged, I don't know, this might sound a little hokey, but I'm going to go with it anyways. I like to camp on the north end of wherever I think I'm going to go hunting, because I'm planning on glassing as many north-facing slopes as I can, and if I'm camped north and I'm hunting south the majority of the time, then I don't have to go all the way around that mountain to look at the north face. I can shift and move south, and I don't have to go near as far to see a whole nother north-facing slope. And so when you're hunting those big, deep, rugged canyons and big mountains, using your glass as much as possible is a concept all of us get preached a lot about. But if I'm constantly hunting north out of camp every day, I have a long ways to go just to see another north-facing slope every time I leave camp. So plan on camping at the north end of wherever you're planning on, and then hunt south, and you're going to cover a whole lot more ground than you would other than that.
That's good. That's good advice. Guys, I want to take just a quick second here and thank the sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com. My friend Cody Nelson, he is the optics authority. I call him the glassing guru. He's the optics manager at GoHunt.com. If you guys need any binoculars, spotting scope, tripods, any optical needs at all, give Cody a call at 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also email him at optics@gohunt.com. I keep teasing on the podcast to tell him that I'm going to give him a knuckle sandwich if he doesn't give you a good deal. And Cody actually calls me about every other day and says, teases me and says that he'd like to see me try and do that. And he says he's going to body slam me if I say it again. So make sure you tell him knuckle sandwich. Jay says that better give him a good deal on optics. I want to thank GoHunt.com for their sponsorship. Also want to remind you, you guys have heard Jordan and Jason talking about GoHunt.com Insider, the filtering 2.0 system. That is an incredible resource for all Western hunters. You can hear these guys are experts. Application business is their business, and they use the GoHunt.com Insider. If you want to sign up for the GoHunt Insider, just go to GoHunt.com/JScott. You're going to get a $50 GoHunt Gear Shop gift card just for signing up. I also want to thank Kuiu Ultralight Hunting. You can find out more information at kuiu.com. That's KUIU.com. I want to thank them for their sponsorship. That is the gear that I wear on all my hunts. And CanyonCoolers.com, based right out of Flagstaff, Arizona. Use the JScott19 promo code. You get a 10% discount. Phonescope.com. Use the JScott19 promo code. Get a 10% discount. And onxmaps.com. Use the JScott19 promo code, and you're going to get a 20% discount there at Onyx Maps. Guys, I want to shift focus here a little bit. We did briefly talk about elk. You talked about the OTC, potentially the archery hunt moving forward in 2020. It's a possibility that it might go to a draw. Let's talk a little bit about elk, and then I want to get into the other species as well.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, elk, I mean, it's amazing, right? There's more elk in Colorado than every other state combined. At least that's what they tell us. I've had a couple over-the-counter experiences there, Jay, that would lend to make me believe otherwise. But I think that that's probably actually an important call-out, right? That you have to. These elk are hunted maybe as hard as any elk in the country, Jay. And whether it's with the archery or all the way through the 4th rifle, and some of these units even have like late rifles that are in December and January. I mean, they get a ton of hunting pressure, and I think that you have to be aware of that when you're planning these hunts, and you have to kind of navigate through. One of the things I would call out, as you've maybe noticed in our other podcasts, we're big fans of Onyx as well. Like, that's such a huge tool, and I think that to sometimes the wrinkles and the opportunities might come in places where you need to have that Onyx on you. You need to be looking where you're at and where you're hunting, and don't think you're going to be alone, right? There's just a lot of people hunting in Colorado, but it lends itself. Those elk feel that pressure so much for so many months out of the year that after the archery season especially, those herds have been shifted dramatically, and sometimes in the areas that have a little bit more private land that maybe don't look quite so inviting, it lends itself to a better experience because at least you're in an area that there's still elk. Once that pressure really gets into some of these areas, it moves them out. There's just that much volume of people going. And so be aware of it. And then where the draw can really come in, especially if you're a rifle hunter, is the first and fourth season, even in the over-the-counter units, with just a little bit of effort, you're there prior to or after, and at a minimum, things are a lot more quiet in the forest than they are during that second and third rifle season, and definitely during the archery season. And even those opportunities with just a little more effort, seems like for me hunting, like the more quality of the experience I have, it's because I did a little bit more than the other guy. And sometimes that means I drove a little further. Sometimes that means I hiked a little bit further. But even submitting an application is one more thing that I did that another hunter didn't do, and it just lends itself to a better hunting experience. And so it doesn't always mean I have to go put 40 miles on my boots to be better. It simply is I jumped through another hoop that another guy didn't do, and therefore my hunting experience is a little bit better, or I start in a little bit better place. And that's where drawing a tag, even if we're looking for this stuff that takes maybe 0 to 1 point, 5 to 0 points to draw, really ups your odds at having a good experience before. I mean, still do all the same stuff when you get to the unit, but with a little bit of effort, you can really increase your experience and have such a much more positive time while you're in the field in Colorado.
In other words, what you're saying is, rather than go to the OTC second and third, fourth season rifle elk hunts, spend your 0 to 5 points and upgrade that experience. The difference between even a 0 to 5 point unit compared to an OTC unit from a number of people and just experience-wise is much better. So you're saying there's a lot of value even in a 2 or 3 point area compared to an OTC with the amount of people that you'll run into.
Absolutely, for sure, because it's just there isn't near as many people in the forest at that amount of time. The tags are limited. That first season, there are I'm kind of rolling through Go Hunt even while we're talking right here, Jay, just so I don't get units mixed up and stuff, and I can look at a map. But I mean, we're talking, I don't know if there's 100, but there might be 100 different hunt selections in Colorado. There's a lot that with 0 points you can draw, and I promise you, when we're looking at a first versus a fourth season versus a second and third over the counter, at a minimum it's more enjoyable because when the sun comes up, you're not surrounded by thousands of people in every direction. I mean, you can actually put, if you were to glass up some elk, like you actually have a chance, even if they're a mile or two away, of getting to them. On some of those second and third seasons in parts of the state, if you glass up elk a mile away, the idea that there isn't multiple hunters in between you and those elk is pretty unlikely. Like, it's crazy that that's the truth, but it really gets hammered. And so with just a little bit of effort, you can definitely avoid a lot of what's happening on those second and third seasons and still get to hunt right where you want to. The same place you've been hunting in a long time, more often than not.
Talk a little bit about the guys that, have, 15, 16, 17, 18 points in Colorado, and they still have this idea that they're going to, get one of the top 1, 2, 3 archery and or, early rifle permits. Talk about, the point creep and the fact that those guys probably need to get more realistic. I mean, I'm one of them. I have 20 points in Colorado, and, the likelihood is I'm just not going to ever catch those top 1, 2, or 3 units in the state. What would be a strategy that you would tell someone, rather than just sit there and year after year after year just keep chasing?
This is always a hard conversation to have with guys, especially if no one's ever had it with them before, Jay, because no one wants to find out that all of the 2 decades worth of effort may not be enough, right? It is what the hard reality is. When we're looking at units like 201, 2, 1, 10, unless we're at max points, unless we, even if you have one less than max points, I think that's 24 this year, the idea that you're going to get to hunt those in your lifetime is unlikely. Now 10, you might be able to slip in there and go hunt, and even you're going to have a little bit of odds of drawing. I think it's in about 6 or 7 years for guys that have one less than max points, but overall it's unrealistic. I mean, if you're setting at 2 or 3 behind max points, you literally have hundreds of guys in front of you and only 1 or 2 successful applicants a year. And a lot of guys immediately want to bring up the hybrid draw. And for non-residents, especially in what would be those, commonly referred to as the best units in Colorado, that northwest corner, that doesn't come into account. The non-resident quota has been filled by the time they get to the hybrid section of the draw. And so all you're doing at that point is donating money to Colorado. You don't have a goal. You might think that you do, but you don't. You don't have a goal. You don't have a finish line. You don't have anything that's happening there. And so it often leads to, okay, so what do we do? What are my options? And I'll tell you, Jay, really there's only a few that stick out for me. And if I had the number of points, that these kind of, that 15 plus, I'm going to tell you probably one that gets talked about immediately, at least for me it does, is Unit 40. You got to be looking at Unit 40. You need to be looking at something different than the first season for most guys. If you happen to be in a place where you're at with 20 points, then just maybe a first season hunt in a few years might be a hunt that you finally have caught up to. But typically second, third, fourth season, I mean, Unit 40 definitely doesn't have the reputation that 201 or 2 or 1 is. It's not an apples-to-apples situation. That's a different unit. There is a chance at a big bull, but bull for bull coming out of 40 compared to those units, it's not the same. I think that's a great 320 to 330 class hunt with a chance at a big bull. And that's what you need to be looking for. You need to be looking for a chance at a big bull if you want to go hunting. If you don't, then, I'm not sure what we've been doing for 20 years, but you're just unfortunately not going to catch the point creep in those northwest corner states. I think some other cool stuff that's happening in Colorado, Unit 20, for a long time now, up by Estes Park and the Rocky Mountain National Park, it makes sense. You've got a national park right there. You've got some elk that start growing up in those areas that probably aren't huntable during a good portion of the year. Maybe they slip out and start looking for cows during the fourth season, or those December and January hunts in Unit 20, I think, can produce an above average bull for Colorado. Again, we're not talking apples to apples. None of these are going to be like Unit 2 or 201 or 1. They're just not going to be, but they're still quite viable for a chance at a mid-300 class bull. We look at down at the southern end of the state, 851, 83. I think those are producing some awfully big bulls, but those aren't going to be good picks for guys that are looking for a do-it-yourself type experience. I think Unit 83 and 851, I'm not sure there is any public in either of those units. If it is, it's extremely low. 76 always creeps into this conversation. Personal opinion, Jay, I'm not a fan. I don't think the points required to hunt in 76 are equivalent to the caliber of bulls most guys are killing in 76. I still get a lot of guys that want to put in for that because they feel like they're getting some value for the points that they've been doing. But I think opening morning as the sun comes up, you see a 300 to 320 class bull in 76, you better get real serious about killing that bull because there isn't going to be much better more years than not coming out of that area. It's been hit pretty hard. They're killing a lot of elk, and it's just surrounded by thousands of hunters during the bulk of the hunting season. So I think that that's playing into what's going on there.
I think some of the muzzleloader hunts, sorry to interrupt, but I think some of those muzzleloader elk hunts potentially could be a diamond in the rough because of the timing. And obviously, the 210s, the 20s, the Northwest, the 210 and 201, they're obviously out of reach for most archers and muzzleloaders, but there's other units that, with not tons of points, you can get a pretty good hunt, bulls bugling with the muzzleloader in your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good call out, Jay. I kind of, being down in New Mexico, we're spoiled because if we push the bullet down the barrel, it's legal. And in Colorado, we're still up against some of the more primitive laws. But for guys who are set up and ready for that, I mean, even now, primitive, there's some really good muzzleloaders that guys can go and have a legitimate, opportunity to shoot effectively at a lot further than they were when I was growing up and hunting with an old, Thompson Renegade and round ball and some of that type of stuff. But it's prime dates. You're with a gun, most guys are going to be able to shoot that at 60 to 100 yards. And it does seem to fly under the radar a little bit on some of these units that are maybe a mid-level kind of tier hunt in Colorado. So, it's just like any hidden gem that you find. The further away from the rut and or the more primitive the weapon you're willing to use, you definitely can find some value in those and find yourself on a hunt sooner than later, for sure.
Let's jump over to sheep, goat, and moose and talk about that.
Sure. I guess let's start with moose. I mean, overall, Jay, moose hunting in Colorado is fantastic. I think that there's a lot of opportunities. There's a rather strict management strategy in place, and so no matter where you draw the tag, I think more often than not you're going to have a chance at a nice bull. Historically 6, 7, 8, 161, that part of the world is going to be the very best that Colorado has to offer. But, again, any one of these units is really going to be a rather quality hunt. Now, something to be noted is they do have the archery, they have the muzzleloader seasons, and then they also have the rifle season. I'll leave it up to guys to do whatever they want to do, but for me, I tend to drift guys towards that rifle hunt always, because even if you want to hunt with your bow, you're getting there pretty early to be hunting in the rut for a bull moose with your bow. And if you want to hunt during the rut with your bow, then you need to be hunting during those rifle season dates, and versus shooting them over water or something like that, I guess. Calling a bull in early September in Colorado is going to be a pretty big feat versus that first week of October should be a home run. You're going to have a real chance at calling a bull in. So, I probably don't have a ton to say about the moose other than just apply, right? And the other thing is kind of going back to this new fee structure. If you're not interested in spending the extra $100 a year to be building points, if you already have your qualifying points there, definitely spend the extra $9 if you're putting in for any other reason, and keep your name in that hat. You won't be getting any more presents in that draw as we move forward, but you definitely have your hat in the bucket, and you got a chance. And so much of this stuff stays pretty low drawing odds, even for the higher point guys anyways. It's really anybody's game. So keep up with that, even if you're not willing to spend the extra $100.
Let's talk about sheep and goat.
All right. So once we get to the mountain goat, there's a lot to be said about mountain goat hunting in Colorado. For me personally, Jay, other than a place or two in Utah, this is one of the more this is probably the most likely a guy in my opinion, in the lower 48 can get started with a place and eventually draw a mountain goat tag. They give a few tags. There's a lot of different hunt codes that distribute the applicants across each of the different units. They have archery only selection down in the southwest corner in G5. It's worth noting that I think the odds of drawing that archery permit are often worse than some of the rifle options. And mountain goats in general are just a great species to hunt with your bow. They're not a super skittish animal, and particularly in Colorado, when you're talking around so many of these ski resorts and the hiking trails and biking trails, goats in general get a little bit used to some people traffic in those areas. And no matter where you hunt or draw, there's a, if you're interested in hunting with your bow, don't feel like you have to be married to that G5 selection. And if you want to chase odds a little bit, so be it. You're going to be up there, and there's going to be a couple guys as well hunting with rifles, but it's still a pretty viable option to consider. And particularly if I'm an archer and I'm kind of looking for that scenario, all you've got to do is look in the proclamation and be looking for different hunt codes that are going to say weekday hunt only. If you're putting in for anything that says weekday hunt only, like in G16 or in G10 or G7, G4, these are identified as high traffic areas that have a ton of bikers, a ton of mountain climbers, all of those types of things, and you can just know that there's going to be, goats that are used to seeing people in those areas. As far as, anywhere in that state has a chance for a 9-inch goat or not. I think a lot of it boils down to, what style of hunting you're more up to. A lot of the success rates in Colorado probably are affected purely by the physicalness of an area versus inability to find mountain goats. G4, is and G17 are historically managed for a lower population of animals, but even then, the age class seems to still be there more often than not to find a good mature billy. And any of the other ones, a 9-inch billy is possible in any unit in the state. And even some of these nanny options, I'll tell you honestly, for me, Jay, it's probably not a real popular thing, but right now I put in for the nanny permits. I put them in Utah. I put them in Colorado. I put them in anywhere that I can because I'm really interested in just drawing a mountain goat tag. And I know that I've got a lot of other stuff going with a lot of other states. And so if I can draw a nanny tag somewhere, I can check the box on that species. I get to go on an amazing hunt. I've done a few of these in Utah in the past. They all are spikes, right? It's all there's the animal.
It's not a huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and the hunt itself is what is the driving force for me, is to be in the mountains. And I want to be there as often as I can, as early as I can. And so when the day comes that I finally draw one of these nanny permits, then I'm probably going to shift everything else that I've got over to a billy tag, and hopefully someday I'll have gotten to hunt mountain goats twice in my life, not just once. So I chase the odds really strongly on those female tags for the time being, and when the day comes I finally draw one, I've got backup plans. I've got other agendas. I've got other places that I've been putting some work in so that hopefully I can go shoot a big billy. But I like mountain hunting. I like to be where goats and sheep are at, and the fastest way for me to get there is to look at those nanny options. It's not for everybody, but for me, that's kind of what my goals are wrapped around. I just want to go. I want to be there.
Let's talk about antelope.
Okay. We'll talk about antelope, and then we'll swing back to the sheep. Antelope hunting in Colorado, first thing I would like to mention, I don't know if this has come up at all, Jay, but I definitely was getting some reports up in that northwest corner of the state this early fall that there was definitely some blue tongue coming through that part of the state, which is pretty scary because that's always been the best part or the best place to, typically regarded as the best antelope hunting in the state. And I don't think it was long-lasting. I think we got a good freeze pretty early that kind of slowed it down. But it's worth mentioning because some of these hunts up in that northwest corner are taking an obscene amount of points. And overall, it doesn't take antelope quite as long to bounce back because a 3 or 4-year-old antelope is as mature as it's going to get. And if I'm sitting on a stack of points, I would want to know that before I applied this year. Just doing the same thing I've done every year is trying to draw one of those elite tags up in 2, 3, or 4, 301 in that part of the world. For guys looking for, okay, if that's the case, what's my next best option? I typically kind of drift towards 83 and 81 down in the south central part of the state, probably 81 over 83. Still think there's a pretty viable chance for an 80-plus inch goat coming out of there. I think a lot of the reason that happens, Jay, is because Unit 52 in New Mexico, which is right on the New Mexico side, is managed for a higher age class of antelope and is regarded as one of the premier areas in New Mexico. It's a muzzleloader, and then this year they started an archery hunt in there as well. So primitive weapons only on the New Mexico side, and I think that you're seeing some carryover into Unit 81 in Colorado. So if you are stacked with points, you've been applying in that northwest corner, and you want to pull off or do something different because of what happened in the early fall this year, 81's probably your next viable option. If you're wanting to go just antelope hunting, and that's kind of the goal, is just to get out, and maybe you're taking your kids on a youth hunt or something like that, I think that one of the things that you're going to have to deal with is private property. You're going to need to be looking particularly on the eastern side of the state, and where you're probably not going to run into as much problem is going to be looking down in that southwest corner where you've got the Comanche prairie that makes up good portions of land in 144, 145, 139. It's got there's some state land in these areas as well that definitely increase the amount of public property. And, we start looking at units like I say, 144, 145, and there's about, 100% chance of drawing that muzzleloader tag in there. There is, let me see, it's not super difficult to get in there and hunt with your rifle in any of those units surrounding that. Other areas, as we drift a little bit further north of there, we really start getting into some very, very limited public land, and we want to watch out for that. But that southeast corner of the state, sooner than later, definitely pretty viable for a chance at taking a nice representative animal. Some of the other ones that kind of drift under the radar, I think, a little bit, it would be looking at Unit 88 up in the north central part of the state. 88's exciting to me because, overall, you're not too far out of the mix. That southwest corner of Nebraska and the southeast corner of Wyoming, a guy can get in there and plan to do some archery hunting with very little points. And really, the rifle and the muzzleloader hunts in these areas aren't too difficult to draw either.
All right, let's talk about my favorite, Rocky Mountain Bighorn and desert sheep. Obviously, there's not a lot of opportunity for deserts, but let's talk about the Rockies.
Sure. So, just like anything, Jay, sheep odds are brutal, right? That's just what it boils down to, and it's unfortunate as we get some of these younger hunters starting to look towards, Colorado as where can we kind of start building a foundation of points. Going back to the first part of the conversation, I do believe moving forward that this will prove to be one of the best things that's happened with these increased point fees that Colorado has come into play. It's for the youth hunters that $100 isn't required, and it gets them past their years of eligibility without that upfront cost. And then again, they don't have to spend that $100. If you can just get them their 3 points, even if you didn't want to spend the $100 moving forward, for $9 a year, they're still in the hat. They still have a chance. They may not be getting more presents in the draw, but if there was ever an application to get your kids started on right now, sheep, moose, and goat, and deer, elk, and antelope in Colorado, you created an opportunity for them that they're always going to have. If you can just get past those qualifiers. When we start looking at, historically best units in the state, I'm going to, S44, S50 are probably the two that stick out for the non-residents that have a chance at a 170 plus ram. I think S32 probably ought to be in there as well. Very low drawing odds. Extremely unlikely that you're ever going to pull your name out of the hat. But if if you're like me and you're chasing odds, for me personally, I want a sheep tag so bad, Jay, that if the write-ups and the things I'm reading say that there's no sheep in this unit and 0% success over 6 years, like right now, the idea of just seeing my name on a sheep tag is probably equal to the day that I put that tag on a ram, because I've been trying for so many years to draw the dang tag. And so I chase odds pretty hard for myself. I just want to get a tag in my pocket, and right now S20 is probably the best odds in the state. Super physical hunt, not a super high population of sheep. They give 2 tags a year, 1 to non-residents, 1 to residents. And you better be prepared to shoot a 150-inch ram if you draw that permit. It's very much not a good option for a lot of guys. It doesn't fit with what their goals are. But if you're purely just looking to try and get your hands on a ram and get a tag, that S20 is probably probably going to be your best option. Probably the next best option is probably going to be S17 and maybe S13. Both of those, again, super physical units. They don't have a reputation for producing big sheep. That's probably the one overlying message with Colorado, is that, there aren't very many 170 class rams a year killed in the whole state. But Colorado's managing those for probably just a 1 year less age class than maybe some of the other states in most of their units to produce that 170 plus kind of sheep. And so you also need to be just a little bit realistic in Colorado when you get there of what you're there to hunt. It's a little bit like drawing the random tags in Wyoming. Like, those units are managed more for opportunity than they are for age class. And the same goes for the bulk of Colorado. So if you're only interested in hunting the very best, I think you ought to stick with, like I say, S44, S50, and maybe even S32. If you're chasing odds, I think S20 is probably going to be your very best pick, followed up by like S17.
Guys, I want to know personally what you guys, Jordan, you talked a little bit about your strategy with sheep and wanting to just get a tag and just get your hands on a ram. Out of any of the species in the state, is there any particular tag that you're like really eyeballing as far as your trophy tag? Whether it be, archery, muzzleloader, rifle, and if not, kind of what your personal strategy is in the state of Colorado.
For just for all species, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, is there one particular hunt that you're like, oh, I want this unit for, deer, or I want this unit, I'm going to wait till I get it, or, maybe you're the opposite and you just want to get tags?
Sure. For elk, for me, Jay, that 4th season in Unit 40 has really got my eye. I think that Unit 40 gets looked over a little bit by the DIY guys because there is a high amount of private property in that unit, But for where I'm at with points, I'm still a few years away from drawing that permit. But it's kind of the one that I'm eyeballing the most. I think there's plenty of BLM and state ground. I think that I might even try and pull that off where I'm starting is the river, and then I'm like hiking up and putting a base camp in, and just the experience around that. I think 40 still has some great bulls left in it, but I think you got to hunt pretty hard, and you got to kind of look outside the box a little bit on how you're going to access that unit and the parts of the unit that you're going to go in on that fourth season, and you're always up against some level of weather. And I mean, there's a lot of factors in play there, but I think that for the amount of points that are required for that fourth season, there's a heck of a chance at a really nice bull on that hunt. And then for deer, I'm a little bit completely the opposite with deer. I want to go hunting often in Colorado, and truth be told, I haven't really found somewhere that I really like home, and it's because I think I can have a good experience anywhere. That stuff around Eagle is fantastic. There's some units around Steamboat Springs. I've really kind of been looking at a few of the options in the southeast corner of the state for some whitetails. Actually, this year, I haven't locked in my Colorado applications, but I'm really intrigued with the idea of going and trying to pull off a DIY whitetail hunt in the southeast corner of the state where there's a little bit of grassland, there's a little bit of public land, and just go see if I can figure it out. Colorado is definitely a state that we like to hunt often here, and so I don't really get married to any points on my deer versus the elk. I got a little bit of a different goal. Moose, I apply for the north center part of the state. I kind of swing for the fence on that one. Sheep, I put in for S20, or I'm going to put in for S20 because it's the best odds, and it sounds horrible when I get there, but at least I'll have a sheep tag in my pocket. And for the mountain goats, typically I kind of drift towards whatever it says is the most physical. It tends to have the better odds of drawing, and I'm young enough right now. I'd just as soon get as many of those under my belt and out of the way as I can. So that's kind of.
Jason, what about you?
Probably.
Oh, sorry, Jordan.
You're right. My sheep, moose, and goat apps pretty much are just like Jordan's. Nothing really different there. For those people that know me, Jay, you probably don't know this, but I'm not an elk hunter. Elk just don't do it for me. So I'm putting in for point only in elk, and maybe some year, long time down the road, I will cash those points in. But elk don't really excite me, and so I don't really have a goal as far as elk. But my deer goal is kind of like what I talked about earlier. I'm building my overall points for a fourth season deer tag I'll cash in at some point. And I'm kind of using the other ones to explore the state of Colorado. So I'm trying to draw some of those second and third seasons throughout the next 10 years or so, and then settle on where I want to finally cash in and go on my big Colorado hunt. So I'm kind of using the second and third seasons to explore Colorado a little bit. I probably will do that whitetail hunt maybe at some point with Jordan's talking about. And then I'm looking at some of the southern units that border New Mexico.
One thing we didn't talk about, guys, is, Colorado's been receiving a ton of snow. I haven't gotten any reports from the Gunnison Basin other than one of my friends, Steve Winery. I texted him, and he said, we're probably okay right now, but we don't need any more snow. He didn't really say it like that. He basically said, it all over the next couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, it's real critical. If we got, some really big storms, it could potentially have another winter kill. What have you guys heard as far as winter kill across the state and any of the units that, normally are affected by that?
We really haven't got much, Jay. Same type of thing. I think everybody's holding their breath a little bit. We're hearing the same thing out of northeast Utah, southwest Arizona a little bit, and Colorado, no different. That if we can just
no more, because the problem isn't the snow as much. From what I've seen, it's always that when we get a big cold front, so if it warms up
and things get a little bit slushy out there, and then it all of a sudden gets really cold again and that ground freezes, that's when we're in bad shape. That's where we could lose a lot real quick. So if we can just keep the sunshine coming, I think we're at an amazing place as far as moisture levels across all of the western states right now for what the winter produced. And we never want to say no more, but maybe uncle for a minute right now, and let's just let things warm up, and maybe some rain instead of snow wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Guys, it's always awesome talking to you on the podcast. I want you to let the listeners know how they can reach out and talk more with you about these different western states, and I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing with us about Colorado and your strategies, both on a personal level and with clients. And you guys always do such a great job, discussing that.
Sure. Well, we sure appreciate it, Jay, and we appreciate your listeners. We get quite a few comments, feedbacks, and phone calls from your listeners, and it means a lot to us. And some just have a quick follow-up question, and we enjoy those. And other guys are, jumping in and enrolling in the program and getting a little bit more of a relationship established. And we really appreciate and enjoy all of it, even if it's just a one-off question for sure. So we would encourage that from your listeners. If you do have just a one-off question and want to chat for a minute, please call us at any time. And we're looking forward to getting this Colorado applications process. This is an exciting one. I mean, the deer, elk, and antelope, I think that we ought to have a hard plan in place more often than not, and not have a surprise happen in those, and know exactly what we're doing. And then that sheep, moose, and goat, I mean, it's anybody's game. Get in that hat and get your kids in that hat. Our Kids Apply Free program, there's not a better one out there. We can take all of the stress and headache out of it at no cost at all. And we'd probably ask the listeners, if you want to kind of keep up with us a little bit more, to check out our social media stuff. Our Facebook page, our Instagram is @WeAreTheDraw, and then we have a YouTube channel, and we're trying to kind of put different content and different things out there, and reach out to us anytime if you got any specific questions.
Awesome, guys. Well, as always, thank you, and look forward to chatting down the road. And it won't be too long. We'll start getting more feedback from these other states that we've already applied for, and see what tags we draw. And obviously, I've got Arizona deer and sheep coming up. Looking forward to that in June, and so we'll just keep plowing through these applications, these states, and these seasons here.
Perfect. We'll have Nevada coming up pretty quick too, Jay, and I've just actually submitted the first application strategy to Go Hunt. So if your listeners are Go Hunt members, check out, that'll be an application strategy that's coming from the draw here. And Mexico's come and gone, but Jason did a bang-up job on the write-ups for New Mexico application strategy. So if you haven't checked those out, I'd encourage your listeners to do that for sure. There's just a little bit more depth there on some of the stuff as well. It's easier to put in writing, I guess, sometimes.
Right on, guys. Well, God bless. Thanks for coming on, okay?
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.